camera limbo. Uh-oh, what the hell was that? Okay, back to our information. I'm slightly confused. Right now, thousands of Michigan children are suffering from child abuse, but you can help fight child abuse through your Michigan income tax return. Just check line 34 to support the Children's Trust Fund, a nonprofit organization that works to prevent child abuse. Check line 34 for your contact.
Good evening and welcome to Sports Scope. I'm Art Regner, and my first guest this evening is Jim Streeter, the Sports Information Director at Eastern Michigan University. Jim Streeter has been affiliated with the EMU sports scene for, well, actually since 1966. For 2 years he was sports editor of the Eastern Echo, and a year after that he was with the Ypsilanti Press and then joined the EMU Sports Information Department as an assistant. 3 months later he was named the Sports Information Director. A native of Albion, Michigan, an EMU grad, and a man who has seen it all as far as the EMU sports scene goes. Jim Streeter, my first guest. Later on we have diver Mary Fishbach of the Michigan diving team, and right after Jim we'll have Mary. So Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Art. Nice to be here.
Jim, most people have not realized, I don't think, that are not really aware of Eastern sports, that as far as Division I athletics goes, EMU is pretty much still maybe even at the toddler stage.
Well, I think that's probably true. We really were college division, or we'd say now Division II, for many years, and we decided to join the Mid-American Conference in 1971, and with joining the conference also came the admittance into the Division I ranks, or the top ranks of intercollegiate athletics. And we didn't really start playing the two major sports, football and men's basketball, in the conference until the mid-'70s, till 74, 75 for basketball, and 76 for football, because of scheduling conflicts and trying to work them in and getting all the league teams in. So even though we have been in since that time, I think it's been a real learning experience for everybody to get accustomed to being in a league and getting accustomed to who we were playing.
Moving from college sports, as it was known there, at that time, which is Division II to Division I, was really not an easy transition for Eastern Michigan. How come? I mean,
well, I think it was very difficult for many reasons, and primarily I think the two major ones. Anytime you have an athletic program, you count on continuity of coaching and of the people in the administration. We went from being a top Division II team or college division team in football and basketball to in 1970, 71, 71, 72, in those seasons, and all of a sudden we were going to make the jump up to the Division I ranks to the Mid-American Conference, and our coaches in the two major sports, in football and men's basketball, both left at that point. And it's very difficult to keep a program going if you're constantly changing coaches, and that's exactly what happened to us. We, I think, probably at that time made a wrong decision on who to hire, and so we got set back a little ways. I think the best way to put it is, as an analogy, is look at Central Michigan. They won, in 1974, they won the college division national championship in football. The next year, they moved into the Mid-American Conference to play for the title in football and didn't miss a beat. But their head coach, Roy Kramer, had left, but Herb Duramity, who had been on the staff for 8 years, took over. So in our view, that was a continuity of the program because an assistant took over. We went from having the head coaches leave to strictly a whole new staff, all new people, and it was a bad time, I think, to make those changes, and it really hurt.
When Dan Boyster left the football team to go on and coach the now defunct Detroit Wheels of the WFL, did he take his staff with him, or do you think that that was a mistake made by the administration, maybe not to hire from his own, from Coach Boyster's staff?
He took most of his top staff with him. In fact, two of the coaches, Ed Klebeck, who went on to become a head coach at Eastern Michigan later, and Ed also went on to Kent State as a head coach, and Boston College also. And Dave Brazil, who was on his staff, went with him to the Wheels, is now a assistant coach with the Kansas City Chiefs in the NFL. So those maybe were people we should have hired at that point, but we didn't. We went out fresh, hired completely new people away from Eastern, and I think that was a mistake.
Do you think that, I was going to ask you, at that time Eastern, not competitive in the revenue sports, but highly competitive in the non-revenue sports, was that because even when the change was made, those coaches still stayed. I mean, they were able to make the adjustment. Do you think that a lot of it has to do with maybe an individual coach? Earlier today you said something interesting. When Jim Harkema was hired to take over the Eastern football program, in all honesty, no one knew how well he would do.
Right, he came from a lower level. But getting back to the original part of the question, I think in the non-revenue sports, and especially on the mid-American level and maybe lower, generally your coaches are teachers. And I think most of them are teachers first who also coach. So the people that we had in the non-revenue sports, specifically in men's track, baseball, and gymnastics at that point, and men's swimming, were all Eastern grads or had affiliations with Eastern for years or had been there for several years. They adjusted very well to the change, but again, it was a different situation with them because they understood the school, they understood where we were going, they understood the teaching aspect of the job that they had. So we were very successful, and that kept on going. On the other hand, in football and men's basketball, it's really a crapshoot when you hire somebody. You don't know for sure. I'm sure when Michigan hired Bo Schembechler, there were probably millions of people that said, who's he, and why hire him when you can hire a bunch of other name people? Well, I think he's gone on to show that that was a great hiring. And I think the same thing is true at Eastern Michigan with Jim Harkema in football and Ben Braun in men's basketball. They are extremely outgoing people who sell themselves to the kids and to the athletes. And I think that's the key on our level because, frankly, you could put Eastern, Western, and Central Michigan under a hat and really pick out any of them and get a great education, have a great time, meet a lot of people, and have a real good time and a good atmosphere and a good college education. So you have to offer them something else to really get their attention. And I think Coach Harkema and Ben Braun also have proven that they can really go out and capture a kid's imagination and say, we are going to take you somewhere, we're going to coach you, we're going to educate you and bring you along and make you a better person. And they sell themselves very well and, in fact, in turn, sell the school.
I want to later on move into more focus in on the football and basketball programs, but I really wanted to set the groundwork or the framework of Eastern moving into the MAC. Before then, they were an independent. Was the move to the MAC more economical or anything else? I mean, at that time, Eastern really didn't have what you would consider traditional rivals.
No, I think what happened was in 1970s, late 60s and early 70s, in football, for instance, we were playing teams like Northeast Louisiana, Louisiana Tech, McNeese State, Arkansas State. We played a team called the Quantico Marines. I'm sure nobody's ever heard of since.
I had a friend play for them,
I think they disbanded, but it was a great way to recruit, too. You played them, and then those guys got out of the Marine Corps, and they'd come to school, you know. So it worked both ways.
I had a friend who actually did that, played on the Marine team, and then was recruited and played for Eastern.
And on the other hand, they also had players that had played college and were in the Marine Corps afterwards and played for them. So it was a good battle for us, but there was still no rivalry built up. So the real thing that happened, I think, was that it cost a lot of money to travel to those places. We weren't building up any rivalries at all, and we wanted to get closer to home to really establish a true base in athletics, and I think that helped by joining the Mid-American Conference in '71 and getting into the conference play, you know, midway in the '70s.
Going now to your job, we've had Bruce Motti on before, Mike Murray from the Michigan SID office. You're right now in charge of, your staff of 2, I guess, is in charge of 20 sports at Eastern Michigan.
Exactly. You're talking about the 2 most overpaid SIDs in the Big Ten Conference?
right. Mike and Bruce.
Mike,
they'll appreciate
and Jim
that.
Schneider, too.
Oh, yeah, we can't forget Schneider, too.
Yeah, we basically have a 2-person staff. And I think I told you before, ironically, when I started in the early 70s at Eastern Michigan, we didn't have women's sports. They were basically club sports at the time. So we had 11 men's varsity sports to worry about and to cover. And we had a staff of 2 full-time people and a full-time secretary, and basically unlimited student help. By joining the conference, and then the women's athletics came in mid-70s, 74, 75, and added 9 sports there. So we basically doubled our load and pretty much now have 1 full-time person less than we did then. And so it's difficult for us to deal with it as opposed to Michigan, where they can more or less really stylize their operation to 1 sport. I know Bruce does football and men's basketball. And Jim Schneider does hockey and baseball, and they can do that, and Mike Murray helps out in basketball and football too. And they also have Jody Humphreys there, who can do a lot of the women's stuff.
Right.
We have to stylize our shop to cover everything. So everybody in our office does every sport. And we try to do every job within those sports so that we all can handle them in case somebody gets sick or somebody doesn't show up. So we're pretty versatile, but I think it's fun because we get to know everybody.
I was going to say, now your assistant Paul Helgram, Livonia Franklin.
From the University of Michigan.
Right, University of Michigan, Livonia Franklin, same background as me. I can't help but like the kid.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was going to say then, now you and Paul, you both write the football media guide, you both write the basketball media guide. At any point, do you see maybe a division? Do you see it coming to a point where now that you're championship caliber, it seems like your workload must triple, that maybe you're going to have to divide the work up?
Well, the one thing about being a championship caliber team, especially this year with winning football and winning men's basketball, the time format has just changed totally. With basketball, for instance, once we got into the NCAA tournament after winning the MAC tournament, Paul and I both spent about 3 days solid just doing basketball work, men's basketball, and that was it. So a lot of times you get the other people mad and they say, well, how come you're not covering track and why aren't you doing this? We just don't have the personnel to do that. So that hurts in a way, but it's also flattering that you get to that level, that national level, where you have to work harder and do a lot more things. For instance, last Monday for the NCAA tournament, we went to Lincoln for the Midwest Regional. On Monday, we sent out about 12 packages by Federal Express just in about a 2-hour period, going to all the talent for CBS, going to Nebraska, going to Pitt, going all over the place so people get information on us. So that just shows you the kind of attitude that nationally you get once you start winning.
EMU has come, as I said, from Division II to almost being dropped from the MAC, now to being the school that is the champions of the MAC. I mean, it seems as kind of an up and down ride. I mean, has it been that way for you in the SID's office, or have you been pretty much having even keel throughout?
It's been pretty much the same kind of format for us, too, that we followed the same direction. But what's really, I think, changed more than anything is that our non-revenue sports, specifically men's swimming, which has won like 9 straight Mid-American Conference championships, and men's track, which has won many championships, had many Olympians, those sports have carried us. Baseball has been real good. They've carried us for many years, and there wasn't a lot of attention because they're so-called non-revenue sports. Once we got very successful in football and men's basketball this year, everybody now looks at our total program who may not have known it before and say, you have a great athletic program. And what they're basically saying is, you got our attention with football and men's basketball. And then they look at the whole program. And I think that's really, the success in the 2 major sports has helped the other sports too. And it's created a lot more work too, like we had talked about in those areas. So it's a difficult problem, but it's also a nice problem to have, because we like the attention.
Now, I know we talked about this earlier, and it was something that I discussed actually when I was covering the Western Michigan hockey playoffs this year. I thought to myself that it would be a great idea if Eastern somehow could form a hockey team and join the CCHA, but as of now, that probably will not happen.
We've had hockey talked about for many years at Eastern, on and off by a lot of people, and hockey seems to have a real strong special interest group. They have a definite base of support almost everywhere it's played. And that's true around the Ypsilanti area too. But the key to adding hockey as a varsity sport is having ice. And if you don't have the ice, it's very, very expensive to go out and have to rent ice time. So until we had ever get to the point where we build an ice arena, it probably won't even be considered.
So I guess there was some talk a few years ago, but pretty much that has died down.
There was some serious talk about the time we joined the Mid-American Conference, but I think what happened was that the athletic director at that time, who was very strong and helped us get into the league, was a very good athletic director, didn't really like hockey personally. So he really didn't push it. And I think that's what you need. You need the special interest at the top to really push it, and we didn't want it at that time.
So basically, it's just too much money, startup costs, you have to get a new arena, and
startup costs, and I think even cost to run it. I think unless you have a highly successful revenue generation type atmosphere there where you can rent the ice time for 23 hours a day or whatever, and afford to pay for the team, I think it's very difficult to make it go.
Well, I guess it's too bad. I don't want to keep belaboring this point with you either, Jim, about hockey, but you would have, even if you did start a program, and if it were to become successful, you wouldn't even get a guarantee to the CCHA. I mean, if the CCHA came to Eastern and said, if you do start a program, we would be more than happy to take you. I mean, would it have to be a move like that to ever see hockey at EMU?
I think it probably would, but again, you know, without the ice, I just don't see it being very feasible. Kent State did the same situation that you're kind of talking about. They had ice. They wanted to add a varsity team to Kent State, so they went Division II, and I think they still play Division II down there. And they went with the same attitude that the ice rink itself will, the rental, the special events you have, will pay for the varsity team itself. And I'm not really sure how that's gone the past few years. So that would be one, I think, that would be studied before anybody would do anything.
I want to get back now to the Eastern Michigan football team. We've had Coach Harkema on, we've had Ron Adams, we've had Gary Patton on this program before. The California Bowl experience, just what was it like for you? I mean, I guess it felt good maybe not having the season not end right away in the last week in November.
We sort of went into the season expecting that we were going to be pretty good, and I think Coach Harkema did too. Whether we were going to be good enough to win the conference and to go to the California Bowl, we didn't know at that point, but we knew we'd be pretty good. And so we were a little prepared for success because we had thought we were going to have one of the better teams in the league, and we ended up doing that. The California Bowl was totally a great experience for everybody that went out. We went out a week early for practices, and everybody that I've talked to that has covered other bowls, for instance the Rose Bowl or Fiesta Bowl or whatever, really came out and said that the people of Fresno just embraced it totally. And I think that was the real key for the players, that you really got to feel part of the community. And once we got there, of course, San Jose State, the team we played, was about a 17-point favorite to beat us.
20th in the country.
Right. So that gave us an extra incentive. The Mid-American Conference, there was rumors at the time from the Pacific Coast that maybe they should look for another league. Maybe the MAC wasn't good enough because they had really blown out the last 2 or 3 Cal Bowls. So we kind of felt like not only did we have a lot of pride for us, for Eastern Michigan and for Ypsilanti, Ann Arbor area, but also to carry the pride of the Mid-American Conference and show them that in '84, when they had talked about dropping us, that was a serious mistake, but we understood. We wanted to be a part of the conference all along. We didn't want to drop out. So I think we showed them and vindicated everybody that we belonged, and by winning the game 30-27, I think we gained some respect for everybody back in the Midwest.
Now, how serious was that talk? Not about, I want to talk a little bit about Eastern almost being dropped from the MAC, but about the pride of the Mid-America Conference. Do you think it was feasible? I mean, it was real. If Eastern would have lost that game out against San Jose State, do you think the MAC would have been in trouble about the California Bowl?
I think it probably depends on if we would have lost, how much it would have been by, how the game would have gone. Very frankly, I think they were having problem this year and maybe last year selling it to the people in that area that it's going to be a good game. Because those people say, why should we pop for $16 a ticket to go watch a team? I mean, if you're living in Fresno and suppose San Jose comes in, which is your worst enemy in the conference, why should they buy a ticket to come watch and blow out a team from the Midwest? And I think they were questioning why that was happening.
Right, they probably buy a ticket to watch, though, San Jose be blown out from a team from the
Exactly.
Midwest.
I think they like that very well.
Yeah, they probably loved watching them lose.
I think we got a few fans out of that one, too. You know, I think it was probably very real, not to the point where it would have been done within a year, but I think down the road, if it would continue to happen, I think they might have looked somewhere else.
Now you've won the California Bowl, you come back to Ypsilanti, you go back to your office, think you can rest for a little while, and Ben Braun turns around, wins 17 out of his last 19 games, you win the MAC tournament, you find yourself in Lincoln, Nebraska. Now at this point, not that the California Bowl was not big leagues, but you are now thrown into a regional, the NCAA Midwest, against a highly rated Pitt Panther team that was finally, I guess, beaten by Vanderbilt, I think it was. Just what kind of experience was that for you? I mean, How many hours have you slept, I guess I should be asking you, Jim, the last couple of weeks?
We were very busy doing the whole promotion and going down to Lincoln and taking care of business there. But I think we can really draw the analogy back to the Cal Bowl that our people were very confident going into Lincoln that, first of all, we were the 15th seed in the Midwest Regional, and that included Notre Dame site and the Lincoln site. And we felt that was totally wrong, that we should have been seated a little bit higher than that. And we also felt that any time you play in championship competition, you're going to have to meet the best sometime. So why not beat them off the bat, especially with a team like Eastern Michigan, which is very unheralded? Why not meet that team right away, maybe surprise them, pull the upset, and then you got a little momentum going into the next round. So we weren't totally displeased with drawing Pitt. I mean, we had played Missouri on the road earlier in the season. They were at that time the 7th-ranked team in the country. We went to double overtime with them before losing 72-70. So we had shown that we could play on either a neutral site or an away site before a hostile crowd against a highly rated team and compete very well. And our kids were, I think, were confident. The only thing we lacked in the tournament, we didn't have a lot of size. A lot of the teams, Vanderbilt, for instance, was gigantic. They went 7 foot, 6'9", 6'9" across the front. So, I mean, they were maybe the biggest team there. So we were a little worried about that, but we knew we had real good guards, and we had Grant Long in the middle, who was one of the top big men around. Unfortunately, we got in foul trouble early with Grant, had to take him out, and really kept it a real good game till about the last 5 minutes. And we kind of ran out of steam. We missed a couple three-pointers. They went down for easy layups and dunks, and it got to be a 10 or 12-point game, and it was out of reach at that point. So even though the final, I think, was 108-90, it looks, 18 points, people say, oh, you got blown out. But it wasn't that way at all, and I think all of the writers that followed us and covered the game understood that that game was a heck of a lot closer than that, and depending on some circumstances, could have turned the other way.
How was it for you, I mean, now dealing with so much press and things like that? I mean, people who may not be familiar with your job, I mean, it's pretty much up to you to be the liaison between the media and Coach Braun at that point. Obviously, he didn't like losing by 18 points, but then again, you're the one that has to say, Ben, the press want to talk to you and things like that. I mean,
after the game, the NCAA really sets up the standards of what you have to follow. You have to have 2 players in for interviews. You have to have the coach in. So really, you have to do a lot of things by the book. But the big demand that you find, and I'm sure Michigan has it all the time, and they understand it more than we do, but the big demand is to really schedule your people so they have a time frame where they can do interviews, and that's it. It just gets so confusing to have 10 people come up and all want to do interviews, and they all want to do it right now, and they have to have it, and they have to talk to Grant Long. They have to talk to Ben Braun. They have to do this. Finally, you just have to get to a point where you say, no, the interviews are going to be from 1 to 1:30 tomorrow. Everybody would be available, and just do it that way. It just gets, it's very cumbersome to try to deal with it any other way.
When a guy like Lorenzo Neely, who's a freshman, playing real well, wasn't a starter in the beginning of the year, but has emerged as, looks like he's going to be a very dominant player in the MAC, but yet he's a freshman. Maybe do you, before you schedule an interview with, like, let's say I call you up and I want to talk to Lorenzo, do you clear that with the coach, or do you have pretty much you can do it if you want, or will Ben say, I don't want Lorenzo to talk to the media just because he's just a young kid, let him concentrate on basketball? How's that work?
It kind of works both ways. It depends what the demands have been, say for that week or 10 days prior to that. Generally, he will have us clear him, but everything's pretty much okay, unless it gets cut into practice time or the guy's going to miss a class to do something. They won't let that happen, but we usually bring them into our office to do a phone interview or a personal interview, so that therefore, in case anything happens, that we're there and we can monitor what's going on. Not that we want to tell them what to say, because the kids are totally free to do that. And I think what happens is your freshmen and underclassmen really are keyed by who the leaders are on your team. Grant Long handles the pressure very, very well, and I think the kids look up to him and watch him and watch how he reacts to the interviews. And I think Lorenzo's really learned all season how to handle those kind of things. And I think our kids found out too, once you get, especially with the Eastern writers, they're very vicious, and you have to really watch, and they will put you on the spot and try to get you to say something very negative. And I think, I don't know if you saw the papers today, but that's sort of what happened with the Pitt players. they were really criticizing their coach because they lost to Vanderbilt, and it was a coach's fault. But I think they're put in a situation where a writer says, whose fault do you think that was that you lost? And right away the player, he doesn't know what to say for a minute, and I think he stumbles and he probably starts talking, and the more he talks, the more trouble he gets into. So the players have to be aware of that, and Grant Long is very aware of that. He handles every question honestly, but he won't bite on some of those that the guys want him to really say. They tried to set the thing up where down there where they would ask him, well, you know, you're obviously going to beat Pitt or something, you know. They just try to antagonize it.
Right.
And he handled it very well. He just said, we're coming to play our game, we think we can beat them, you know, and so on. So I think our players have handled that very well, but I think they've gotten good leadership from their coaches and their upperclassmen.
I wanted to briefly touch on the alumni support. I mean, has it always been there, or is it now everyone jumping on the Eastern bandwagon?
I think it's a little of both. I think we've had a core of alumni that have supported through the lean years, and I really feel for the people that had to sit in the stands while we were losing 20 or 25 football games in a row, and maybe some bad weather, but I tell you what, there were a lot of them that came out, and they came out consistently all the way through that. And of course they criticized, and of course they wanted us to do better, but they stayed with it, and that's encouraging to have alumni support like that. Now obviously once we've had the great success, slowly but surely the people start coming out of the woodwork. And we have nothing against that, and I don't blame anybody for doing that. The thing that really is encouraging about the whole thing is that I think they were there at times over the lean years, but you can only take people to the limit so many times and drop them. Then they finally just say, forget it. This is too much of a hassle. It's a heartbreak. I don't want to come out and see this. So I think now we're to the point where we've won the California Bowl. We won the Mid-American Conference Football Championship. We won basketball. We qualified for the NCAA. I think they're saying now, well, it's worth it to support that program because they're successful. And we know they're going to do it. They're not going to get us to the peak and they just drop us.
But the critical part, I guess, is really next year to see if Eastern can sustain, maybe not winning the championship, but at least competitiveness. I mean, I'm not trying to put either Coach Harkema or Ben Braun on the spot, but I think some people might even, maybe the cynics in the crowd are still going to take a wait-and-see approach to see what happens next season.
I'm not sure if our people will be as cynical, I think, as some of the people around the league. And when the media get together prior to the season in football and basketball, the media votes on where they think the rankings are going to be. I think that's where you're going to see the cynicism, because I think they're going to look at football and say, well, you lost Ron Adams, you lost Gary Patton. No way. They're going to go back down to 6th or 7th. I don't think that's going to happen. And the same with basketball, because we lost Grant Long. I don't think we're going to drop. And I think because of the strong leadership, Jim Harkema and Ben Braun have built solid programs. And they're not keyed to having a great player. They're keyed to having great success as a team. And I think our basketball program was a prime example. Our team was never too high, nor were they too low all season. And I think that's why we were able to win those 17 out of 19 of the last 19.
I want to touch on the big sister up the street here about U of M. I know that you're not in competition with them or anything. Different level, same division, but can Eastern and Michigan coexist being only miles apart?
Oh, I think we definitely feel so. And it's encouraging for us that Michigan is so acceptable to what we want to do. We use their facilities during spring football, for instance, because we have grass, and it's really hard to really get the grass ready for spring football at this time of year. So Michigan's been very adaptable to letting us use their fields. If we need to go indoors, we need to go indoors during the California Bowl preparation. Bo was very kind to let us go in there and practice a little bit. So it's really a great working relationship, and I think at times we really have two separate crowds that we're dealing with. I think they're dealing with a totally different kind of, maybe more affluent kind of alumni and local support, and we're dealing with more of the alumni, people in the Ypsilanti Ann Arbor area, and people that just want to come out and enjoy football. So I think Michigan has become the entertainment package in football and basketball, not necessarily for the fan that wants to go watch a game, but the fan that wants to be where the action is.
Right.
And I think we, as opposed to that, are a place to go to watch. It's easy access, easy to get in and out, a lot smaller crowd, and yet it's still good football or basketball. So I think there's kind of two different crowds. And we've tried to coexist by doing a lot of scheduling changes, and we play at 6 o'clock in football, and they play generally at 1 or 1:30, and I think that works very well.
I want you to care to elaborate on this statement. EMU allows an athlete time to develop. I know we talked about it. I wonder if you could just elaborate on it.
Well, I think the prime example we could use is probably a kid like Grant Long. Comes out of Romulus High School, 6'8", 210, probably more of a suspect than a prospect. Michigan really doesn't recruit him at all. We recruit him. I think University of Detroit recruits him. He comes to Eastern, has a very slow start, plays a little bit as a freshman, a little more as a sophomore, firmly develops as a junior, and becomes a great senior. Michigan, if he comes here, say even as a low kind of recruit, stays here for a year or two, I think Michigan and the schools like Michigan have a tendency to recruit around kids like that. They don't develop after 1 or 2 years. They don't have time to wait.
Another body comes right in.
Their people want to win now.
Right.
They don't want to develop character. I mean, they want to see some bodies in there that can play. So I think we afford them the opportunity to develop slowly. And I think because of that, they get great teaching, because we have to develop. We don't get the great kid out of high school generally. Now, we will get 1 or 2 once in a while, but generally we'll get the kids that are projects. And Grant Long was a typical example.
One final question. I know you've been involved, as I said, since '66 with EMU. I know you're alumni.
I came to school at 12, that's why.
Right, exactly. Child prodigy.
I know.
But what can you, I guess, tell? I work with a couple of people down at WPZA who are big Eastern alumni and stuff, but from the inside, I mean, from where the program was to where it is now, I mean, it's definitely on the upswing. Your frame of mind real happy?
Oh, I think so. And I think, like I said before, I key it all the way back to the coaches. They have made it an exciting place to be and to watch games. And I think that's the whole key to the program.
Well, Jim, thanks for being on Sports Scope. It's always a pleasure going into your office and talking for hour upon hour. And I just appreciate you helping out with lining up people like Coach Harkema, Ben Braun, and things like that. Continued success.
It's been fun.
Thanks, Jim. We'll be back with U of M diver Mary Fishbach right after this.